I'm Belcher, I'm Labour Cooperative People East, which is here.
I'm Helen, Spencer, I'm Cllr. I am group leader of our Greens on Traffic Council, so I live in South Manchester.
I'm Knight Cllr. I'm City Councillor in Norwich Store Ward, and I'm one of the founding members of the Trans Groups.
I'm Helen Belcher. I currently head up Transactual. I was a co-founder of Transmedia Watch back in the day. And I'm currently on Wiltshire Council's cabinet for the Lib Dems.
So just the way that today's session is going to go, we've got some questions that we're going to leave to the panel. We'll go through them, and then at the end the audience will have the opportunity to ask any questions as well. So I'll just start with, given that most of the panel today are councillors, the first question that I'd like to ask is what levers the council will use to enact change in support of trans rights in their local area.
Well, I'll start. So, what day is it today? It's Friday today. So yesterday it was scrutiny, and we had the Equalities Report come to us, and there was a lot of things within it. But specifically, back in 2022 in Norwich, we had a motion about supporting the transgender community, and within that motion, the council decided that they would add MX as one of the honorifics on council forms. Now, what came to scrutiny, they said that they were going to remove all honorifics from forms. So the council had previously resolved to add MX and now is removing all honorifics, and they've prepared an audit for policy waiting for clarity on the biological sex ruling. So I basically was able to ask that any policy had to come through me, and I got to look at it, and I also put a recommendation to Cabinet that any policy that they do put forward has to be consulted with the trans community of Norwich, because in Norwich we have, I think we're the third or fourth highest trans population per capita, so there's about 1.06% identifying as trans. We're also the second highest number of people identifying as non-binary. So like we were a very trans city, so it was really good to be able to ask that question and have that scrutiny, because Labour only a couple of years ago were quite happy to campaign on trans rights and get involved with trans rights, and then as things have been going backwards from certain members of Labour who have decided that they're not so happy supporting trans people anymore. And since that's been going backwards, it means that cabinets that previously, love to talk about how, welcoming that they are and everything like that. Our Labour cabinet was very, very proud of the fact that they'd stood up for trans rights, and now they're sort of looking all sheepish and not sure what to say. So I'm hoping that they'll listen to me. I'm hoping that they'll, take my recommendation at cabinet, but we'll see. It's at the end of the day up to the administration to make those decisions, and I think that a lot of local councils could be a lot bolder about how they support trans people.
I'll pitch in. I'll give a specific example and then a more generic comment. I took over as the cabinet member responsible for business development and assets at the end of May. And on the day that we took over on the council, I then had a meeting. My first meeting in role was about assets. It was actually about toilets, deep joy, with the chief exec and legal officer of the council. And they had already worked out that whatever they did, they would be sued by someone. So I was saying, well, just keep being trans-inclusive then. There's no additional cost to doing it, you might as well keep doing it. And they were already kind of in that position anyway. So I think from my personal perspective, as a cabinet member, I exert quite a lot of influence over some of the workings of the council. It hasn't stopped a statement being made which I'm not particularly happy with, but in terms of the functioning of the council, we've got agreement that we will remain trans inclusive, and we'll see how long that takes. But given the recent employment tribunals, I'm more hopeful that actually that is a position that will stick. And it's interesting, Ro, that you talked about leavers, because this morning I read a piece which was actually, politicians talk a lot about leavers. And the issue with leavers is when you pull them, you expect something to happen. And politics, particularly government, is very complex. So you can pull a lever and actually nothing happens because it's diluted, the effect of it is diluted so much. So it's actually more about showing leadership rather than pulling levers. And being, for me, being the role model, speaking out. We had a council motion back in September, October time, where we were, I'm not put my name to it, but people had consulted me all the way through it, about supporting the LGBT plus communities in Wiltshire, and our, quotes, lovely conservative opposition decided to completely defang it and say, but we should be nice to everyone. And I wasn't going to speak in the debate, and eventually I got so flipping angry that I spoke. And it didn't change very much, other than suddenly all the Conservatives were very uncomfortable looking at their feet. Because, oh, we're all the same, we're all human beings, it shouldn't matter. When confronted with, when I'm attacked, it's not because I'm a human being, it's because I'm trans. And they didn't have any answer to that, surprisingly. So, for me, it's about leadership, not necessarily leaders.
I've not been whilst I've been on the council 8 years. I've been MP. Before that, I was on Leeds City Council. But council got a lot of statutory powers, far more than I was a backbench MP. And a number of those powers are things where the council can make a decision which is trans inclusive. So I've a case where I had a trans couple, and we had, and this was 2018, this was a little while ago. We had an issue with council licensing, marriage licensing, about their marriage certificate being issued in the gender of their gender recognition certificate rather than their birth certificate. And we stepped in, the council officers didn't really understand it. And we stepped in, the council at senior level also stepped in, and we got the council change policy. And from that point onwards, that has not been an issue, and continues not to be an issue in Leeds. So that's obviously each individual. I imagine most local authorities have been doing that for a while, but that didn't seem to have come up as an issue here. But there was training done with licensing, and now it is a sort of gender inclusive marriage licensing. Maybe a slight irony of that was at the following election 2019, one of the couple who I spoke to on the doorstep told me they were going to vote Conservative because of their taxes. But that's not for the right reasons. The other example, which is a bit more political, is a council from we have a number of local parties in Leeds, which is really about representing their area and nothing really much to do with any of the national parties. Booked a room in the Civic Hall, which is like our town hall in Leeds. We have a town hall as well, but Civic Hall's most places would be equivalent. For a gender critical group. The political leadership of the council stepped in and didn't allow that to go ahead. So there's two things. One is where they've got statutory duty, and one is where they've got some political power. And I think that might be an increasing issue, particularly as reform get more on the council.
My comment was a bit more broadly about, I think for anyone who doesn't know, councils are slightly limited in some of their powers towards individual councillors. One of the issues that we see time and again is misinformation that is spread, the scapegoating of trans people and other groups. And I think there needs to be some significant changes so that councils have more power, I suppose, to act against those individuals, because we've seen in the borough where I am, we've seen two by-elections recently that have been fought and won on misinformation online constantly, and there's just no comeback at all for those people as individuals, and that affects every single person, because that's our democracy that is under threat. That needs a joint effort from councils and governments to start to try and crack down on that.
I think it's really important to know. I think building from that, I think one particular area, and you mentioned toilets a minute ago, that trans people particularly scapegoated in is sort of this stereotype of threat to women, and that's how it's posed. And I think one particular thing I think is really important is that the rates of gender-based violence against trans people are incredibly high, as much as they are high with the nationally in the UK. And I think I just want to ask you, what additional steps can politicians take to reduce gender-based violence, but also to ensure that trans people are included in that instead of put in opposition to that?
Thank you, and thank you for the toilets issue. I should say I'm a plumber. My main job is I'm a plumber, so I love toilets. Absolutely love them. I love talking about them. I love fitting them. But I'm tired of the conversation always being about toilets, because every time we talk about that, we miss the bigger picture. And I'm not going to speak for trans people. I try not to do that. I try to listen. I try to be an ally. But I am going to speak, I suppose, as a cis woman who's tired of hearing people speak for me and say that the threats that I face are suddenly now in toilets and changing rooms, when the biggest threats that I face are at home from a partner, an ex-partner, a family member, whoever it may be. They're the biggest threat to me, and for as much as we give the headlines to toilets, and I don't want to sort of minimise that, because we know that toilets are a way of people accessing public life, and I don't want to minimise that, but I'm just really tired of that conversation shifting away from being about the threats that we all actually face together, and that does include trans people. I feel like I had to just sort of say that from the outset, as I say, because I joke that I'm someone who loves talking about toilets and fitting them, but the conversation needs to move away to the actual causes of the threats of gender-based violence.
If you cast your minds back to the sunny days of mid-April after the Supreme Court ruling, there was a lot of discussion about toilets and changing rooms. And I think for a lot of people that's where suddenly things became slightly more real and slightly less weird. And actually by the following week, I saw the anti-trans group starting to moan that the focus was on toilets and not on prisons and schools, because they wanted the narrative that us evil trans people were transing vulnerable children and we're actually all sexually violent predators. We should all be in prison anyway. And I think I'm going to move a little way from your question, because I think what we've seen through that, and then in the last couple of weeks with Women's Institute and Girl Guiding, is suddenly a lot of people are thinking this is not right. It's gone too far. This is interfering. This is trying to push the law to interfere in people's social lives, how they actually live. And I think that is making certainly a lot of my women friends, well, a lot of my women friends are already on side clearly, but in the sort of circles that they mix in, you can start to see some of the effect of, no, this has gone too far. This is not right. And so there's a kind of slight more sensitivity, I think, to the way that trans people, we live our lives. And I think in terms of addressing the whole toilet myth, the sexual violence myth, really you can only do that through evidence. When the Scottish Parliament heard evidence regarding their gender regulatory reform bill, they actually put a paragraph in their report which was, there is no evidence that trans women are a risk to other women. That is clear. When pushed, the opposition could find no evidence to support their position. And sexual violence by men is pretty much all about power. And men who are inclined to do this are not inclined to demean themselves, and they would generally see dressing as a woman to be a very demeaning thing. So the whole basis of the argument is fatuous. You know, why would a man intent on violence go into a woman's toilet dressed as a woman when they could just as easily wield a spanner and pretend to be a plumber?
Not in the name of plumbers, are we?
I'm not saying
We're not having plumbers here.
but the whole argument is absolutely facetious. And you had one of the Irish government ministers about a month ago say this in public. He said, why on earth would anyone fall for this spurious narrative? You know, it's just completely bonkers when you apply a moment's thought to it. So, yes, we need to work strongly, as hard as we can, to reduce gender-based violence. Driving home yesterday, heard Kenny Badenoch's response to the misogyny things. I don't often swear out loud when driving. I suspect the nearby cars actually heard me. What the? You know, it's just insane. Oh no, white men don't commit misogyny. What? That's bullshit. So I think that this is where we need to work quite cleverly in terms of building on people's experience. An astonishing number of women have experienced some level of gender-based violence. In fact, you know, a huge number of my friends have experienced it and are traumatised to some degree from it, however long ago it was. So I think there is a lot of work to do around addressing the principles of misogyny and just saying to young men and boys that this is not acceptable. This is not acceptable. Women are not there to serve you in whatever way you think. We are our own people. So there is a big campaign still to happen.
God, I hate talking about toilets. I'm sorry, I really am. This is the thing, is I think that whenever we talk about toilets, we're talking about a completely wrong conversation, right? Because if we want to talk about toilets, let's talk about accessibility. Let's talk about the fact that, like, if you want to use a public bathroom in a wheelchair, you are going to have to go ages and ages to find one. Like, we're talking about, like, oh, we've got to make sure that we've segregated all the toilets properly to make sure that, you know, category A can't mix with category B. But actually, the number of people that can't use public bathrooms because of the way that they are currently set up. Like, let's think about, like, some of our Muslim comrades. Like, they don't want to use these bathrooms because they actually can't, based on their faith. They have to be in a private space to be able to clean themselves. So they can't use these public bathrooms. Why are we not talking about how bathrooms affect everybody? Instead we're talking about one very specific issue about 1 in 100 people who might be trans going into a bathroom that might make somebody feel a little bit uncomfortable. It's like a massive theoretical when we have an accessibility issue. And it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. But when it comes to, like, what politicians can do to support trans people, I mean, I think we need to be a bit more aware of, like, where this kind of transphobia comes from and where, like, this very clear, like, attack against trans people that has been building up over the past couple of years. There is funding coming from the US, from evangelical organizations who are specifically looking to try and roll back women's rights. This is about abortion. It's always been about abortion, and it's always going to be about controlling women. So when you control trans women, you start to put the chess pieces in place for the next move of controlling women. And that is the entire point of the operation. And I think that we need to actually be honest with ourselves about the fact that, like, fascism is coming. And if you look at the Weimar Republic that happened before Nazi Germany, you know, this was the place that was studying trans people and giving the first like affirming surgeries and things like that. And then they burn our books. So I think that we really need to think about the way in which trans people are being demonized in the media, because it is the first step towards fascism. So when there are parties that are taking all middle grounds and stuff like that, you are standing on the stepping stone to fascism, and all it is going to take is a little push from Nigel Farage when we get there, that they are going to be able to do all the horrible things that fascism entails. And I think that, yeah, we really need to, as politicians, be more wary about the rise of fascism. It's happened before, and let's not walk into it blind this time.
Well, let's not walk into it at all this time.
Yeah, preferably.
And also, sorry, Alex, if we're going to come in. It's not just about policing women. It's about the whole principle of bodily autonomy. That's what they're coming after. If you don't look a particular way or behave in a particular way, you're not a real person as far as they're concerned.
A friend of mine has been challenged to show his genitalia.
So it's a real attack on the basis of human rights.
Sort of straighten quite a lot of areas in the response. Maybe come back a little bit, because obviously got more questions, which maybe go over those deep things. But I mean, so, you know, as a cis heterosexual male, you know, my very strong view is that cis heterosexual males are the problem here, and the vast majority of perpetrators of sexual violence are cis heterosexual males, and there is, and it's sort of been supercharged by, and I'm not saying it didn't exist before, but by social media and the use of the internet and nefarious acts, whether they're foreign or domestic. I don't think we can say that it's just, you know, the religious right in the US or Russia or other actors that are doing it. Is domestic as well. Andrew Tate is definitely British, you know, so that's fueling this, and we you know, and I think that the government put a strategy out this week, and there's many good things in that strategy, but I don't think whoever the government was, whatever shape of government was, that you would completely be able to resolve this problem with a government strategy. There's a deep cultural thing here, and I think that it's about trying to, you know, you know, we talk about fashion coming. At the moment, it's being we're in the sort of phony war part of that, because it's the culture war. So that's the bit that we're fighting now, and we have to win that culture war in the hearts and minds, particularly young people. And if we don't do that, then we will end up in a very dark place. And we just need to, you know, we can look what the UK looked like in 5 years, we don't win it, by looking at the US, and, you know, maybe 10 or 15 years by looking at Russia, you know, or other countries. And that's why we've really got to deep dive into this, and so control of social media companies utilising things like the Online Safety Act, which is too weak. Having those, and then also having the positive forces, all the positive things, rather than just being negative all the time, are really important. And then we can start to win that battle. We had a really, you know, horrible incident in my constituency on 26th of April, where 2 women were attacked with a crossbow in Heading. I'm sure lots of people didn't know about it, and you know, that's a result of effectively, you know, we're not going to get a court case because the perpetrator killed themselves in the attack, but definitely in all of the things we've seen, there's definite evidence of misogyny and of those influences on him. We see it all the time, people who undertake violent sexual attacks where they've been either directly groomed or influenced by online content, and that's an area that we absolutely have to tackle.
I think all of that sort of draws on the fact that everybody is interconnected, especially when we are talking about trans rights. I think a lot of these discussions sort of come back to the fact that trans rights, like you said, is the first step to broader reductions of everyone's human rights in general. I think that leads on to a question that I wanted to ask about, specifically when we do have the BH people. But then we also see testimonies of Kate Osborne, a cis woman who has frequently had her gender challenged because of this increasing these stereotypes around gender presentation. It all comes back to sort of that policing of autonomy that I said there. And I think I just want to kind of hone in on that discussion and ask what kind of politically can be done to highlight that the removal of trans rights will impact everyone eventually. When you have, I think, you have like TERFs, and it's like, how do you see them, and it feels like they're missing the point of like, trans people aren't a problem, they are the removal of their rights is a sign, a warning sign for what?
I've been very careful to try and always talk about the impact of what's going on with any gender non-conforming people. You know, as I say, if you don't look or behave or sound in a particular way, you're running greater risk of being challenged. And is that really a society that you want to live in? So for me, it's about the language, and I don't necessarily centre trans people. Bless you. I don't necessarily centre trans people in any of that conversation. For me, when talking to people like Alex, and we met last Wednesday, you know, clearly I do centre trans people a lot in those kind of conversations. But in conversations to the media, I focus very much on the impact of it on everybody else and how impractical it is. Who decides? Who decides whether you are female enough or male enough to use a particular facility or go into a particular space?
The toilet cops.
Yeah, the toilet cops, yeah. And so that then becomes, you know, a game of roulette, doesn't it? Because some traffic, it's a bit like airports. You know, some airports allow you to sort of not zip up the plastic bag, and other airports absolutely insist that you zip up the plastic bag and chuck everything out if anything goes over the zip. You know, do we really want to play that kind of jeopardy game every time you want to go out? And actually, this is something which impacts women and girls. It won't impact men and boys in anything like the same way. I mean, they will still be impacted, but their spaces are not the spaces being policed. Yeah, so I think that there is, for me, it's about, I've always tried to do this in all my years, is to try and broaden it out from, okay, yeah, this proposal is pretty rubbish, really, it's going to affect me in these ways, but actually, it's going to affect you in these ways as well. So for me, it's about how you broaden out and bring people into the campaign.
Okay. Yeah, right. How are you meant to follow that?
I don't know.
I mean, I was going to say, it's like what like, you know, I think what I'm like, as I've said, a cis heterosexual male. So why am I deeply invested? Why do I go every time we have a ministerial state, an urgent question, a debate, whether it's on trans health care, whether it's on EHRC, whether it's on puberty, but why I'm always there? Like, it's not really because of the constituency, although, you know, I'm not sure that we're not Norwich, I don't think, but we have definitely got a higher than average number of trans people in my constituency. That's not the reason. And the reason for me is because I'm from a small minority community. I understand what happens to small minority communities if the majority decide that you're the problem in society. The end game of that is the attempted, or unfortunately in some cases, the actual erasure of that small minority community. And that's why I see defending the trans community as vitally important. And I think the second thing I say, I mean, I bet there's not many people here who like the phrase British values. You hear it a lot, British values, right? But for me, British values is, those are British values, standing up for small minority communities who could not, on their own, resolve the issues for themselves. I mean, it'd be great if every small area community could do that. But for me, British values is you stand in allyship with those people and help them. And we need to get back to that as a value. And why we've done certain decisions that we made in this country in the past. You know, this debate is also very similar debate to asylum seekers. There's a lot of overlap. In many areas it's not, but in some areas like on a sort of macro level there is. You know, and what are British values here? We're getting, for me, entirely wrong, and we're allowing Nigel Farage and Reform and others, some of whom before this said they were progressive, whether they were or not I don't know, said they were, and they've been, you know, co-opted into this sort of right-wing, autocratic, you know, proto-fascistic sort of policy agenda. And we, you will struggle. You can all Google, try and find me holding up a Union flag or an England flag, and maybe some football somewhere. But I don't think so. You know, I think that is actually very acceptable during the World Cup to have an England flag, but apart from that, not so much. But you know, however, I do think that we need to be, you know, taking some of these things out into the mainstream society and trying to pull them back.
Looking forward to it when members of the on trans rights.
I'm writing
I think just to finish up, I suppose everything that everybody has said is really important, and some things I'm not going to go over again. And I think politicians being brave enough to say something even if they think it may not be popular. I think we've all probably been in that position where we've maybe been in a group where we're outnumbered and we have still stuck firmly to our views. That's happened to me. At Hustings I've been at where I've been challenged about my views on, you know, being vocal about supporting and defending trans rights, and it is about being brave. But also I think acknowledging and still making sure that even if there's only one person that is affected by something and they cannot live in dignity and in peace, that is still enough reason to fight. Yes, it's important for all of us because inevitably we will be the next ones, but actually it still comes down to that one person, or whether it's a small group or a big group, it doesn't matter. It's an individual basis of every single human having the right to live a life of peace and dignity.
Completely agree. And I think I'll round up with the final question from me before we hand it to the audience. But I think when we are talking about this rise of fascism, it's not surprising to say we're very much witnessing a significant decrease in the removal of trans rights, but also lots of other minority communities. And I think when we look at statistics like the IRGA Europe, and the UK in 2015 was ranked first for the treatment of LGBT people, and now we are 22nd in Europe. We look at the fact that for trans people specifically, we are ranked 45th out of 49 countries. And I think you look at that, and at least for me, it can be very easy to feel quite powerless, and like, how do we deal with that? And I think I kind of want to ask, as politicians, what actions can politicians outside of the cabinet take in getting us to where we actually want to be?
I'm going to use this opportunity to talk about the HR scene, because like I've not mentioned it, and it's like well, other people mentioned it's not really the route. But I'm not going to start with the guidance. Actually, I'm going to start with the body, the Equality Human Rights Commission. I think the Equality Human Rights Commission is no longer really fit for purpose. I'm on the joint committee for human rights. The joint committee for human rights and the Women's Equality jointly, and this happens every time there's an appointment of a new chair, has a pre-appointed scrutiny of the person that the Secretary of State has nominated, and the, I won't say unanimous opinion of both committees, but particularly more, a couple of people on the Women Equality Committee that definitely support the appointment, but yes, yeah. But there were one or two on ours, in terms of ours as well, that were not quite in line, although one said it was opposed to appointment. But anyway, I'll get into the minutiae here. But we're opposed to it, and actually, if you take trans rights aside, the other reason we're opposed to it is because the person on it as chair had very little idea about issues around race. She couldn't, like, we had Afsal Khan who's campaigned for years to get a definition of Islamophobia, which we are now moving forward with, although the activists of hatred. And she couldn't express really any knowledge or review on it. And this is the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And and she was sat in a room with Afsal and Doreen Lawrence, who are both on our committee. And you'd think that she would protect maybe like who are on these committees, and what might they ask about, And then she didn't know anything. I asked about, because we've got here people might know Paul Johnson, who I don't think is here, I haven't spotted him, who is probably the premier expert in Europe on Protocol 12 of the European Convention, which is sort of overarching equality sort of wrapper, which if we had in law, which we haven't, unfortunately, it's more of my campaigns to get it ratified into UK law, would give universal legal protection for all people who use trans community. She didn't have a clue about it, didn't know what it was, and I'm trying to pursue me about it. So for me, I'm sort of in my thinking about this. Part of me thinks we should go back to what we had before, which was we had different commissions for different sets of protected characteristics. Maybe we should do that. We should certainly, or at very least, have people who are individual commissioners. And at the moment, I'm not sure if the date's closed or not for the new commissioners. It has closed. I certainly know a lot of people that I message asking them to apply to new commissioners. When we're going to appoint 6 new commissioners, I hope the new commission will be much better than the old commission, which was dreadful. But I think that something needs to be done. We are about to get, I think, from what I've heard, the Equality and Human Rights Commission and the international banding of similar bodies can be downgraded. We're going to Geneva next year to meet the body that does it, the international body. And on the specificity of the EHRC guidance, the interim guidance, which has just sown confusion. Let's just take away. Let's just not think for 1 second about transformers, but let's think about businesses. I'm thinking about the bars and leads who come to me and say, we don't know what to do. Just don't know what to do. That's interim guys don't know what to do. And I said, well, if you look, it actually doesn't really have any standing. It's in the news section of the website. I just said, and actually I was accused, I think it was by Rosie Duffield, of basically encouraging business to act legally, which is definitely not the case. It's not. It's got no standing in law. And again, I'm a bit disappointed why the WI and the Girl Guides acted before the full guidance came out. Now we're waiting quite a long time for this full guidance, and I'm not critical of that because it's 200 pages. And I know that both internal government lawyers and external counsel are looking at this, and there is a very large body of opinion in my party, I know in your parties, that strongly thinks that the Secretary should send it back to the new commission, and I think there is an element of waiting for the new commission to be in place before it's sent back. So I can't tell you for sure that it is going to be sent back. That I don't have that much knowledge, or I'm not inside the room. But the timing of it very much seems like waiting for things to happen, and then hopefully then getting much better guidance. The bit that's really difficult, and I'm not going to go and campaign for, is to go and say that we should change the Supreme Court and change our judicial system, because actually that's where we're going to get into real trouble. If we start trying to politicise judiciary and judiciary, that is exactly what autocrats and fascists want. And so I'm not prepared to go there.
You didn't ask me to stand, Alex. That's a disappointment. Yeah, I think the question was about what do politicians outside cabinet do, and I'm assuming you mean the cabinet that meets in 10 Downing Street, rather than the cabinet that meets in County Bolingbroke. There is a transaction I have kept a watching brief on parliamentary activity and trying to log it. And this year it has proved beyond me to stay up to date for the first time. And part of the reason is that I was doing something on it last night, and in the House of Commons there have been, I think, 20 or 21 separate debates or questions, let alone moments where trans is raised, for example, in Prime Minister's questions, which is more than the past 4 years put together in the House of Commons. And what I think is happening is that people like Alex are being much more vocal, they're challenging much more, we're seeing more questions being put down, we're seeing more Westminster Hall debates being undertaken on our terms. And I think that's good, actually. I mean, in the last Parliament, it was kind of like, oh, please don't talk about us, we just want it to go away. Well, yeah, what a miscalculation that was. And so we've got a group of people, and it's not the usual suspects. So it is people like Alex, it's people like Tony Vaughan, Tim Roker, Rachel Taylor, who are starting to drive a narrative from the parts of the Labour Party which cannot be written off as extremists. So I think that there is, and we've built, you know, as any good lobbying organisation should do, as kind of an intelligence base on MPs. So we kind of know who's on side and who isn't, and we know roughly more, probably about 60% of MPs currently are on this issue. And we know there's significantly more on our side than on the other side. So I think that also gives a level of confidence. The issue is, as Alex will know, if the government decides to whip a vote in terms of let's restrict trans rights and it's a 2 or 3 line whip, we're going to get a lot of problems because you know, not a lot of the MPs will not really want to break a whip, certainly at this point. So there is a lot already going on, and I think a lot of MPs are dealing with a number of questions from constituents who have been affected by what's happened or are worried about what's happened, and certainly on the Lib Dem benches, because of my former aspirations to be like Alex and sit on the green benches, I know a huge number of our Lib Dem MPs, a disproportionate number of our MPs, and so a lot of them come to me and ask questions about me, you know, of me about how they should deal with things. So there is a desire to do the right thing visibly. It's a question of how to do it intelligently, how to do it without being routinely monstered in the press, because in the last Parliament that was a real disincentive to a lot of people. So I think it's about encouraging that behaviour and not being too pure about language. So in the last Parliament, I mean, I don't know, Alex, whether you get beaten over the head for using the wrong language from our side.
In the press in 2018 on this.
Yeah, you know.
Quite a while.
So you know, there's a tendency on our side to say, naughty person, naughty MP, you've not said this in exactly the way I want you to say it. I think at the moment we need to give a little bit of leeway and allow MPs to say stuff that they're confident in to get to the right point. Because at the moment I think there's, well, certainly in the last Parliament, there's a number of MPs who were really worried about putting their head above the parapet because they'd be shot at from our side, and that's really not
But that
clever.
happens to your mum.
Yeah.
And it was wrong to do that because she's on that side, she's on the side of the trans community, and I was very disappointed. I know people have their reasons for it, but I was very disappointed to see her being treated the way she was on social media like that. So I just thought, well, you know, she's actually speaking of support. So
People are worried about using the wrong language. That's true.
Yeah,
And
and
people
I
will be kind.
I do think that to a certain extent the left spent a very long time deciding that it needed to be and it needed to say all the right things at all the right times, and that's absolutely fucking meaningless. It's completely meaningless, because whilst we're all arguing about what words to use, I've been on a waiting list for 5 years. It was easier for me to get elected than to get healthcare. It was easier for me to get elected than to get a job as a trans woman. It's easier for me to get elected than to find stable accommodation. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous that here we are talking about words, and we're talking about what language people are using, and we're undermining our own argument to a certain extent by getting all excited about words, when actually what we really need to be talking about is why on earth are waiting lists at a point where the average is something like 100 years because of the way in which the average, there's places that have ridiculous waiting lists. It's insane. So, and here we are saying words and platitudes and getting upset with people that are our allies. Doesn't make any sense. It's a waste of everyone's time when actually what we need to do is have healthcare reform.
I think that's really helpful to summarise that conversation. I think just looking at the time, so I think we've got maybe one or two. Does any of you want to have any questions?
Yeah.
So you talked a lot about fascism and it coming from the right, coming from America. I've been tracking what's been happening in the trans discourse for the last 8 to 10 years. I can tell you that in this country, it started on the left. And the TERFs that we talk about actually came from the Labour Party, it came from trade union movements, and it came from the second wave feminists, many names of. So my question is, we're seeing people that are in government at the moment who are in positions of huge amounts of power over our children, over women's rights, over the appointment who is going to be the chair of the EHRC, who are obviously been listening to these other members from the left who have established huge amounts of power, and they have the ear of the likes of those streets and the likes of Bridget Phillipson. What are you, as politicians on the left, going to do to counter that? Because trans kids are dying, trans women are being attacked, and it's opening the door to the far right coming in. It's literally opening the door and saying welcome in. We've got members of the Labour Party today that are on GB News talking about the fact that they think that all trans kids should not have healthcare, parents of trans kids should be put into prison, and that we should be demonised and basically pushed out into the sea. And so within your own parties, what are you going to do about that?
I mean, I'm not sure I completely agree. So one, I don't think that like Wes and Bridget are just in hock to a load of gender crits in the Labour Party and not listening to
Why is
anybody
it
else.
meeting them then?
Well, I think that I think there's a bit of a thing here where, and I don't really agree with it, that it's about ensuring that you're meeting everybody.
So even meet people.
So I'm trying to.
I just don't think that defending West Streeting.
I'm not
means
defending it.
meeting
If you let me
is
get to the end, then you might. So and I don't like both. I don't like this whole both sided. We had it in a few people on the I don't agree with it. I think we've got a very strong group of Labour MPs, and in the party we have Labour for Trans Rights, who very consistently go and speak not just to Wes and Bridget, to Downing Street, to other sections today where this is an issue, MHCLG and others. Then we're pushing back very hard and working very hard to do that. I don't feel there's some sort of underlying conspiracy where there's a lot of money or individuals or whatever, using a sort of astroturfing, because like there is no equivalent a Labour for Trans Rights, that's in the mainstream of the party, pushing the other thing. there's like Labour Women's Declaration, very small, very marginalised group that has no voice in constituency Labour parties and there's no real vocal supporters in the PLP. We've got a few individuals, absolutely, and look, I'll be honest, I would struggle, and I know individuals to say that there's any party where absolutely everybody in the party is pro-trans rights. So I'm happy for you to come back and say that is absolutely the case in both your parties, but there's been clear instances where in the past where that hasn't been the case. And I imagine, well, I've not met them, that even Reform there might be one or two people who are pro-trans rights. Right? Maybe. There's a lot of confused people, you know, in Reform, so maybe there is. And so I think that, you know, I was sat behind Jonathan Hinder when he made that awful intervention on the Future Bloc statement, and I massively disagree with him. I'm not quite ready at this point to say, because of that issue and that view, that we should expel him from the Labour Party to make his own decisions in time. You know, even he clearly won't. His view will not be the one that's going to go forward. So, you know, all we've got to do is we've got to have that internal struggle. And if you're in a big, broad party like ours, with 405 members of Parliament, we need to win that battle internally and for the country. And I absolutely understand that, and that's what I'm doing every day. And I'm not just organising internally in my own party, I'm working with other people from other parties and trying to build a broad consensus in Parliament. And there's a lot of us, you know, Helen mentioned Rachel Taylor. Rachel's having a really strong leadership role in this. She's one of those people like who has been challenged because of how she looks, and you know, I think that those people who are the sort of mainstream, sort of centre of the Labour Party sort of people are the ones that are going to win out, not the ones that are on the hard right of the party that come in from other worlds, you know, with views from those cultures. And brought them sort of in with them into the Labour Party, and I think that is where we're gonna land. But we're gonna have to work together.
Can I just say something about what we've done in the transaction last year? I am an ambassador for Flag, which is a charity that's been established for well over 30 years in close plantation. We have written to West Streeton from Cashman, a relationship with Park, that has asked for numerous occasions, and he has refused to meet us. He arranged to meet us and cancelled the meeting earlier this year. And we, as I say, as a charity, have been around for 30 years, covered the whole spectrum, because originally it was very much focused on LGBT and fighting for Section 28 and same-sex marriage. And yet he met Bayswater, who'd been around since 2019, and he talked to people about that. You can see the obvious influence that they have had on everything that he has done. So although, and I'm not directing this to you, I know how much good work you do, absolutely. But to say that he is talking, and same with Bridget, we have written to Bridget on numerous occasions to ask to talk to her about all the school's guidance. And we barely get responses from her office, and we have not yet seen him in the ministry writing to him for well over a year. So he's not meeting both sides, and there are other parent groups, and you know, Helen's involved with something on Labour Hub in signatures we've got, the Neon
They've
group.
got more than Bayswater.
The Neon group
And
we've
that's
got.
in a matter of months, and they've not been listening to anybody writing to them for years. And then, you know, the chair of, you know, Kitchen Portman had a hotline to, like, medical starters, you know, taking calls from her, and would not speak to any trans organisations or even any
Yeah, I know that about
So I just think it's just like, it's very frustrating when we are doing things and trying to speak, and we know that we are not getting responses, or we have to wait months for responses, and we have sent follow-up letters. And yes, he did offer us a time, but it was the same day as the spring statement, and it would have been, you know, anyway, it got cancelled, and then we never been able to do another day. So he isn't doing both sides.
That's
With the ballot that might be the end of the hour, so I believe we might be able to have a few more minutes after the end of the session where people will be able to stay around. Is that okay with everyone? In which case guess, could we ask individuals just to come with questions up to the front and do that? In the meantime, I want to personally say thank you so much to everyone who's come in the room. Also thank you to the lovely girl who's here. Most of all, obviously, to our wonderful panelists, Alex, Helen, and Jenny. Thank you so much for everyone being here. It obviously means so much that you bring support and just listening and learning. It's very important to us. So yes, please, first of all, before we get on questions and we get to have a conversation, could we ask people to gather for a photo at the front, if that's okay? If anyone who doesn't want to, if you just